Are you considering an Ironman challenge this year, but not sure if you're going to be ready? Well, then this video is for you, because my name is Stephen Moody. I'm an Ironman U certified coach and a veteran of 10 Ironman finishes. In this video, I'm going to talk through key topics that you need to note before you hit that register button. And they include what your starting swim, bike, run ability should be. How long should it take an average athlete to get ready for an Ironman? What the typical training volume would look like, what equipment you may need, and the costs. And to wrap it up nicely in a bow at the end, I'm going to recommend, if you've decided you're good to hit that register button, which are the 3 best beginner-friendly Ironman races for you, and both in North America and in Europe. Okay, sounds great. So let's get to it. We have a lot of info to cover. So what sort of swim, bike, run ability should you have before you should consider taking on an Ironman challenge? For me, I have general rules of thumb about I would expect an athlete to be able to swim 1,400 meters with rest in a single session. Biking wise, I would expect an athlete to be able to cycle continuously between 60 minutes to 75 minutes. And run wise, again, continuous running 30 to 40 minutes. Now, if you're not there, I wouldn't say that Ironman's never going to happen for you, but I take a longer term view. I'd start building up your base fitness, maybe using a base plan just to get to that level. And then you can start looking at an actual full Ironman plan. And a power tip, if swimming is your weakest, which tends to be for a lot of age groupers taking on an Ironman challenge, look into getting some one-to-one swim lessons or joining a master swim group or a triathlon club, which will give you a chance to have some one-to-one eyes-on swim coach feedback, and they can help you with the very technical of our part of our sport, that is swimming. Another question I get asked about when someone's ready to take on an Ironman challenge is what sort of race experience or how many years in triathlon should they have? I'm very firm in this belief that I do not believe an Ironman should be your first race experience. It's too much of an undertaking. There's too many things you need to be good at and understand how to operate in triathlon. So if you are considering it being your first race, don't. There's a simple path of actually even doing a 70.3 first to kind of get used to racing, open water swimming, transition, nutrition, etc. Ideally, if you're new to the sport, you shouldn't even be considering an Ironman because you're missing the point. Ironman is not triathlon. Triathlon is not Ironman. I would strongly recommend you start building up in a very progressive path. Do a sprint race, which is 750 meter swim, 20k bike, and a 5k run, or an Olympic, which is a 1,500 meter swim, a 40k bike, and a 10k run. And then do maybe a 70.3. Now, again, I said you do not need to rush into Ironman. Ironman is not going anywhere. But if you can do it in a progressive manner and you take your time, you'll have a much longer period of time in our triathlon community, which is way more than just a single branded race. It is, it's a lifestyle choice. So I'd love people, if they're going, I want to do an Ironman, cool. If you've done no race experience, take a minimum of a 2-year period on it. For year 1, do a sprint race, do an Olympic race, do a 70.3. You can do that definitely in a year. If you're not anyway, no triathlon experience, then look at it in year 2. That's the quickest I would recommend anyone to do it. You'll enjoy the sport more, you'll enjoy the experience, and you'll also realize that triathlon is not all about long bikes and long runs. It's short, it's fun, it's club spirit, it's community. It's the right way to go about taking on an Ironman challenge. Okay, so how long would it take someone to get ready for an Ironman challenge? Now, difficult to say definitively, as it does depend on a number of factors which you've talked about: your base fitness, your swim, bike, run ability, and your race experience. So that means you could be looking at anything between 16 weeks to 2 years plus. But let's just make a couple of assumptions and I'll give you what I would think the sweet spot duration for training for an Ironman is. Again, let's assume that our swim, bike, run ability ticks the boxes of the 1,400 swim, the 60 to 70 minutes of continuous cycling, the 30 to 40 minutes of continuous running. And our athlete has done a couple of sprints, a couple of Olympic races, so they know about triathlon racing, open water swimming, transition, etc. In that, with that assumptions, I would put down the sweet spot at around 36 weeks is a good solid chunk of time to train for an Ironman. It gives you some contingency if you're injured. It's long enough for a base to build up required fitness. And it gives you a chance to bake in a B race, like another Olympic or 70.3, to give you that race experience. And when you turn up to your Ironman race, you're confident that you know what you're going to do. Okay, so how much will an Ironman year cost you? So I'm going to break this into two parts. First off is the must-haves and unavoidable costs. And we start off that with the race registration, which will cost you around $800. Now, you need to bear that in mind that that's non-refundable. There are some sort of flexi pay options, which you'll get a partial amount back, but Ironman aren't great with transfers, deferrals, or refunds, no matter what happens. So assume you're never getting that back. So it's a commitment. Now, that's for branded M.Dot races. There are cheaper other races, such as outlaws and local domestic races, where you save a lot of money in terms of they could be a fraction of that, 300, 400 pound dollars, whatever it is, whatever your country. But they do not have the same level of razzmatazz that Ironman has. It's hard to explain when you think we are racing the exact same distance, but just the level of showmanship that Ironman bring to the party, they do know how to do that very well. Other must-haves that you should take into account when you're budgeting for this is if you're doing a race abroad, you'll need to look into accommodation and flights. And these, depending on the region that you're going to, may not be cheap. For example, Sweden, Copenhagen traditionally have higher cost of living, and therefore they may be a little bit more pricey. There are other options in terms of, but like sort of lower cost areas in Spain and Italy, for example. So again, it might actually influence the location of your race. A pro tip here is to actually do pro power tip is to do a racecation where you actually bring your family over, you get there a few days earlier, make sure you're all settled, race, and then stay in the location because you're absorbing the travel cost anywhere. And also means you get to pick a cool location. Now, there are some other costs I'll talk to you about in the next section, which are nice to haves, but something you need to do it. But before we move on, I'll tell you what doesn't cost a penny, and it will be great if you hit that subscribe button. And if you're finding good information, if you like that, like the video, because it'll help me grow my channel and help more cool athletes like you. Really appreciate it. Okay, so we talked about your swim, bike, run starting point, how long it might take you, and the cost. You're not frightened off. So now let's talk about what the training volume and structure might look like for you in an Ironman year. To illustrate this, I'm going to take one of my beginner Ironman training plans from Training Peaks, and I'm going to show you the kind of the heavy loads in the base period, which is where you're building your aerobic fitness, and also the build period, which is when you're building your race specific skills. Now, overall, if you're looking for what the average training volume will be in an Ironman training year, it's between 9 to 10 hours a week. Okay. And that's typically built up of 3 swims, 3 bikes, 3 runs, and a rest day. And in terms of what will that peak at the most amount of training you'll do in any one week, that will be just before you taper with 2 weeks. That's going to be around 14 to 15 hours. But what does that look like? So I'm going to put up the heavy load in the base period in week 18 on the screen now. And as you can see, there's the 3 swims, 3 bikes, one of which is a big long bike, which is around 100K. And then there's also the 3 runs, one of which is a long run, which would be very easy effort for around 26K. And there's a rest day. Okay, so I'm going to now bring up the screen now where you're going to see the build period, which would be, as I said, the absolute peak of your kind of training before you taper, as in just allow the body to recover before you start your Ironman. As you can see, similar structure, 3 swims, 3 bikes, 3 runs. But as you can see that the run and the bike volume are slightly different in the sense that you'll have a milestone session here of 180k in the bike, and you have a brick, which would mean what means technically when you run straight off the bike to simulate what will happen in a race. The long run is not much different to base, but it's around 28k, as you can see, but it's got race pace, so you'll be pushing your body a little bit harder to get used to what the legs will feel like on race day. And we have our swims, and there's an open water swim here because you will be needing to practice those skills. Okay, so that's what the type of event for your tracking. And now it's time to talk a little bit about those nice to have costs, which I mentioned earlier. As you can see, an Ironman year is not something you wing. You don't make this up. You need a plan. Now you've got a couple of options. You can go to the internet and download a free plan, or you can buy a Don Fink book, or you can look at the other end of the scale where you look for a one-to-one coach, which will be more expensive, but you'll get accountability and flexibility in your plan. Or in between, you have the option of buying a plan of Training Peaks, which will sync automatically with Zwift, your Garmin, and tell you what to do in terms of vary the sessions intensity based on your heart rate zones or your power zones or your pace zones, depending on what plan you buy. Very much mid-cost, but you need a plan. And if you're looking for that midpoint option, check in the links below, because that's where I have my link to my plans, which might help you along the journey. If you have any queries on that and any queries in general of all the things I've discussed here, please feel free to email me at info@smartenduranceSolutions.com. That's on the screen now. And I really hope you take on board the journey, that nothing's frightened you off, and you have a super Ironman journey and a super race day experience. So what sort of equipment do you need to race this distance? Now, that's the great news about the equipment side of things. Whatever you've used to race any previous distance triathlons, they will be 100% adequate. If you've got a solid road bike, cleats, helmet, perfect. Do you have an indoor trainer, just a standard wind trainer or turbo? Perfect. Do you have a functioning wetsuit? Great. A Garmin or fitness wearable and a heart rate capability? Brilliant. You are good to go. Now, absolutely, a TT bike will make you faster. Absolutely, a smart trainer that syncs with Zwift or a power meter to give you more dialed-in numbers will help. But these are nice to haves. You don't need to throw all the money in the world at this. And my power tip to guys is that you actually reward yourself with upgrades once you hit things. So if you complete all your base training, for example, and you don't miss any sort of sessions, you get yourself the latest Garmin. If you complete this distance and you feel, wow, loved it, want to do it again, then you upgrade to a TT bike because it will make it faster. So make it cost effective. It's going to be it's going to take enough of your time, and hopefully you'll enjoy the journey. Speaking of which, if now we're going to talk about what races you could pick, or we haven't frightened you off. So if you actually there's the race option for 3 beginner-friendly options for Europe, 3 beginner-friendly options for the US, depending where you're coming from. And if that was useful, guys, please, again, subscribe, like, and come back and watch some other content. Really happy to help you on your journey. And if you're looking for a plan, info@smartenduranceSolutions.com. Have a great day.